Teachers of Reddit, what is the most overkill, way more work than necessary assignment you've seen handed in? Story 1. Former teacher. I used to live in Japan, and my first gig was as an English instructor. I had these two students, best friends, both housewives in their 50s, who took private lessons with me once a week. They had no legitimate reason for learning English. They were just bored. When I asked them one time why they were studying, they literally told me, "We have nothing to do." One time, we somehow got on the topic of folk stories. They brought up one I wasn't familiar with, and I was like, well, maybe you could tell me about it next week. Next class rolls around, and they just wordlessly head up to the front of the classroom and bring out a box of those old-time storytelling sheets. The kind where each illustrates a pivotal scene, and on the back you've got the dialogue and narration to tell the story. These two had gone through and translated everything into English and had decided to act it out for me. Now, the story in question is Momotaro. It's about a young boy that puts together a ragtag group to go off and fight some villains. So, try to imagine two Japanese housewives in their mid-50s really getting into character as they act out the parts of a young boy, an elderly married couple talking dogs and pheasants, and even fearsome ogres. They went at it for like 15 minutes, and it was the best thing I'd ever seen. Then, at the end, they gave me the storytelling sheets and told me to always remember, I was the TA in a college psych class, so teacher and student, I guess. The class was all student athletes in the summer. They needed to do minimum work to get the C and keep their scholarship and keep the university donors happy with their ball-catching skills. They were supposed to write a paper on mental health. 5 pages. This one guy, star running back, wrote 20 pages of how his mom struggled with depression and how that changed his life and outlook. I think he started writing it, and it became a cathartic experience for him. I thought he was the dumbest kid in the class when we first started. He got the only... Story 2. I was the student in this scenario. Back in high school, I took civics free enterprise classes. Well, one project was to pair up. A team had to come up with a general product, and each would make their own brand and create a flyer for it. The two would then present it as if they were competing products. Me and my partner decided on doing energy drinks. So my partner makes his brand, Extreme Energy. On the other hand, being the Smash Brothers fanboy I still am, decided to name my brand after my then main, Captain Falcon. So my product was called Falcon Punch. Day of the presentation, my partner shows off his flyer for Extreme Energy. When it's my turn, I showed what I did. Not only did I make a flyer, I put in my computer skills and made a full-on commercial and presented it to the class. Not too long ago, I came across my old teacher. Even after almost 7 years, he told me that he still has that DVD. He uses it as an example of what someone did to cement that A. Story 3. I once wrote all the answers on a biology test in rhyme. I was extremely arrogant and loved showing off. I'd probably punch me in the face if I met myself from 8 years ago. Story 4. In kindergarten, my son would get assigned classwork by the teacher that had something like the following directions: draw 4 birds. So my son would draw 4 birds, then head draw some clouds, then head draw the ground, then head draw some trees, then head add nests, rocks, mountains, sometimes a river, etc. The teacher told us she was very impressed at his drawing skills and willingness to go the extra mile. But it was really tough to figure out where the 4 birds were. She didn't shame him or us. She thought it was funny, but still overkill. We have had a few conversations about this topic with him over the years, letting him know the point of that exercise was to make sure the teacher knew he understood the quantity of 4 things and could represent that. Now, he completes his classwork and then turns the paper over when it's blank on the back and draws huge, imaginative scenes on almost every paper. Story 5. Astronomer here. A few years back, I had the physics lab for pre-med students, i.e. undergrads who want to be doctors. Their physics class was only algebra-based instead of calc-based. These labs had a little write-up, which was maybe 5 to 6 pages max, and I told the students up front that there's no way these had to go over 10 pages double-spaced. I then had to change the policy to start docking people who went over 10 pages because I was getting 15-page reports. I would then get pages just shy of 10 pages, single-spaced in tiny font, as if I wouldn't notice this trick and had never been a student. These were all such type A students who figured I'd be more impressed by more words and needed to get an A in the class after all. There was also rampant cheating, but that's another story. Thing is, these reports were never good because, as I've said, these labs were not that complicated. If you were that verbose, it meant your writing was not concise. And that's terrible scientific writing. I kept offering help on this, but the do twice as much as the teacher request mentality was too strong for many. I always wonder which made it to med school from that class, particularly out of the more neurotic ones. Story 6. Not a teacher, etc. High school drama class had a very laid-back, fun teacher. As such, a lot of people started showing up to class late because it was right after lunch and the teacher was chill and didn't mind 5 minutes or whatever. But it started to be a problem when half the class still wasn't there 15 minutes after the bell rang. So he asked for a volunteer to find a fun way to punish people who were more than 5 minutes late. My hand shot into the air like Hermione Granger in her first potions class. The teacher said, just like a spinny board or a box you draw cards out of or something. But I already had a plan. I built a wheel like what you see at carnivals where it spins and a pointer lands on a section. Only this was no ordinary wheel. It lit up. It made sounds. It was literally constructed out of a wooden art easel and stool top looking thing I got at Home Depot. No cheap poster board or glitter here. No, sir, it took me a week. The day I brought it into school, I set it up before classes started and got a drama 10 minutes early to plug it in and test it to make sure it worked okay. Then I turned off the lights, covered it with a sheet, and waited. Once everyone was in their seats, I whipped the sheet off and flipped the switch. Everyone was speechless, including the teacher. The will had stuff like slam poetry about Mr. Teacher, do the Macarena, and so forth. It was freaking awesome. Once in a while, somebody would come in late, would have an excuse to get the thing out. It's been 10 years, so I doubt it's still there, but you can be sure I'm going to check at the reunion. Edit, no, wait, I was a student. Story 7, one talented student in music appreciation class made a scale model of the organ in a Mormon tabernacle, Salt Lake City. To see link below. It was very detailed and took many hours to create, but beautiful. Story 8, obligatory, not a teacher yet. But my current creative writing teacher told our class about a girl in one of her other classes. They had an assignment to write a short piece of around 500 words, and one girl handed in a small binder with a 16-page, around 8K word story in it, complete with a cover page and illustrations. The teacher used this as an example of what not to do. The worst part was her saying that the content of the work wasn't actually very good. I still cringe to think about it. Story 9, my English teacher in my senior year of high school asked us to write a historical fiction short story, 7 to 10 pages, thoroughly researched with citations and sources and stuff. It was a cool project, and we had 4 months on it. I was that guy. I was originally going to write a story about World War II, and so I interviewed my grandfather, a World War II vet. He never talked about his experiences with anyone, but I figured he could give me a bit of advice. Turns out, he was ready to tell me about his story in whole. I turned in a 16-page story that recounted his tale using 2 proxy characters. I changed details and added a couple other scenarios to reflect some of my other research. She commented that my story was overkill, but fantastic, and made her cry. Edit'll see if I can't dig copy up. I know I don't have the computer it was written on, and since I recently moved, a lot of my hard copies of things are gone. So I make absolutely zero promises. If I can't find a copy, I'd be happy to write about my grandfather's story a bit. Edit 2 didn't have a hard copy. I spent my night looking for you all instead of playing Persona 5. Feel loved? Piso, in order to talk about my grandfather's story, I think it might be best to start by introducing him. He went by Joe, and was the kind of guy you wanted to be like. People on the internet talk about be the person Mr. Rogers knows you are. Well, my grandfather was the kind of guy who Mr. Rogers took notes from. Very calm, rational person, except when he heard something funny. He laughed a lot, finding humor in the weirdest of places. Always had a kind word for everyone, especially the kind of people that most would say don't deserve the kind words. He was retired when I was born, so the man I knew was a gentle giant. He was 64 even when he was slightly hunched over and very lanky. Even in his old age, him and his wife went dancing 2 nights in a week, and they hugged often, so he tended to hunch over to be physically closer to her. He played golf 3 to 4 times a week, never competitively because he was really, really good and didn't want to hurt his friends' feeling by beating them. Went to church twice a week. Wednesday nights was for himself. Sundays, he went to say prayers and give offerings for his friends that couldn't go, took care of his neighbor's yard for them. He claimed he did it to keep himself busy, but he was actually a disabled Vietnam vet and couldn't do it himself or afford lawn care. In short, a fantastic guy all around. Now, I was told from a very young age not to even playfully hit him in the head because he had a metal plate on his skull. I was told you'll find out when you're older, and true to the words I was told, when I was 12 I asked again, and was told my grandfather was in WW2 and had been shot. I didn't find out the whole truth until I was 17. My grandfather didn't like talking about the war, so I just asked him about how he felt during the conflict, what he did in his downtime, but that's not the story he told me. I guess he decided I was mature enough to pass his story on to, but he never told my mom. She would have not understood. She's super self-centered and not really able to empathize with other people. My grandfather was part of the Omaha landing in D-Day. He was pretty green, had been through training, but that was his first actual operation. He got off the boat, got a decent way inland, and was promptly shot in the head. The bullet hit the side of his helmet, penetrated it, and grazed his skull. He laid on the beach, head propped up on a dead person's legs, firing as much as he could until he ran out of ammo. One thing I didn't mention about my grandfather is that he believed in the cause. After getting a steel plate attached to his skull by the field surgeon, he paid the doctor to lie about his injury. Joe, you see, wanted to keep fighting. He wanted to do his best to contribute to saving the world because it was the right thing to do. So they patched him up, gave him a new helmet, and he was sent back to active duty. My grandfather managed to make it to just outside Germany before he got seriously injured to the point where he couldn't fight anymore. During the Battle of the Bulge, he was shot 3 times in the leg, ribs, and arm. He was sent home after that. The thing that really got him to change how he viewed people was when his company found a group of German deserters. Up until then, all the Germans he saw had been in uniform. Seeing them in civilian clothes made him realize that his so-called enemy was also just people. It was the moment for him when it clicked that the German soldiers were likely just as angry about their friends being killed as he was, that they were scared too, and that everyone is kind of the same. He was always proud of the job he did, but never the means that he had to use. He always regretted never actually getting into Germany, but he fought until he literally couldn't hold his rifle anymore. Story 10 student, like all the other ones, it was Wednesday, and he was being really chill. He wasn't really like that, so it was weird. He goes through his lecture, and 2 minutes before class, he assigns us an assignment, bring in 10 night crawlers tomorrow. Being the smart ass I just went to the local gas station where they had some pre-packaged for fishing. I put them in a sandwich bag and turned it in the next day. The next day, he collects every once, and Friday, we had a substitute. Turns out he actually went fishing. Story 11, obligatory. Not a teacher, I was the student. In math class, one day, everyone was acting out and talking. This was like 11 years old. The teacher got super pissed and set us homework of every question in the entire chapter of a textbook we had just started on. As I was at a new school, I was terrified of being the only one not to do the homework. So I went home and tried it all that night. It probably took me about 8 hours straight. When I handed the homework in the next day, I apologized that I didn't really understand the last few sets of questions and probably got them wrong, but I'd given it my best effort. Honestly think the teacher was just embarrassed I'd attempted it. After that, he was always kind of nice to me, though. Don't think anyone else even attempted the homework, and the teacher didn't mention it again at a day. Not Faye. I don't even know if Faye. Story 12. I had a physics teacher in HS that told us if we forgot to put the unit of measurement after a number, he would assume the unit of measurement was a furlong, which was used in horse racing or something, as he was grading papers. He came across this kid who was way off on every single question and didn't put a single unit of measurement. Turns out the kid converted every answer to furlongs and got a 100. Story 13, obligatory, not a teacher, but in high school, everyone made a huge deal about the sophomore biology research paper. The paper itself was something like 20 pages long and needed to have an accompanying PowerPoint presentation that you would actually present to the class at the conclusion of the assignment. After hearing people make such a big deal about it, I was determined to do well. So I decided to write my paper on genetic therapies for degenerative diseases. At the time, they were still fairly new, so I ended up spending hours and hours first teaching myself genetics, and then combing through every scientific and medical journal I could find for information. At one point, my teacher expressed concern that I was taking on too much, but I thought she was just underestimating me. I have trouble with executive functioning, so I used to have a lot of trouble with organization and turning in assignments on time, but I was really excited about this topic, so I assured her I had it under control and kept working. As it turns out, I had misjudged how deep people were getting with their topics. On the first day of presentations, I remember this feeling of disbelief as I watched everyone else give what seemed like second-grade science presentations. One girl literally just wrote a report on what an APGAR score is, which essentially involves looking at a newborn baby every once in a while to make sure it's still breathing. I ended up getting an awesome grade on my paper, but I'm pretty sure I lost everyone with my PowerPoint presentation. I felt like they were all judging me for being a show-off when I really just thought I was working at the expected standard edit biology, not biography. Story 14, buddy of mine was super into blacksmithing. In metal shop class, we had to do something which applied the techniques we learned. This dude made a suit of armor that he had been working on for like 4 months before he even took the class. Story 15, well, I am a teacher, but my students are lazy, so I will tell a story about myself. I was in a freshman-level U.S. history course that required an end-of-the-semester paper. I had done the research for it, but hadn't written anything by the night before. That night, I downed a 4-pack of energy drinks and wrote a 20-page essay that I still maintain was barely long enough to answer every question they wanted answered. It was the longest essay, turned in by 13 pages. Most people wrote 1 to 3 pages. Story 16, student, not teacher. I had a professor once who had extremely strict rules for papers. 12 points times New Roman. Couldn't be less than 2 pages or more than 3 pages single-spaced once you took out the heading and title. His goal was for us to be concise, since this was a science-wide course. I went to office hours once, and was waiting in the hall for the prof when a kid from our class comes up absolutely shaking with anger. He got a 70 or something on his paper. I looked at it, and it was like 9 pages long in tiny font. I mean, you didn't follow the rules, friend. He was furious, but I hope he learned a lesson about doing what you're told. Story 17. My professor told me this story once when I was an undergraduate. Keep in mind, I went to a really liberal, almost stupidly casual college, which is probably why this man still had a job. He was my literature and writing professor who taught a lot of edgy lit courses and had a unique slant in which we would watch a film a week that related to the theme of the course. So it was also a mini film studies, I guess, because the courses were taught thematically. It worked. Now, the story he told happened many decades past, but the short version is that he was tired of watching the same films over and over and wanted to experience how a student would experience the film for the first time in a class setting. He had this brilliant, read-misguided idea to order a movie based on title only and watch it fresh with the class. The movie he chose was called 8, I think. It involved a number, and he assumed they were referring to Fibonacci. Nope. It was hardcore gay. My professor didn't want to admit to the class that he goofed, so he sat through the entire thing pretending that it was intentional. One by one, all the students grew disgusted by shots, but munching, and they left. At the end of the film, only one student remained, a nervous transfer student that had arrived that semester. My professor turns to him, his eyes wide and horrified by what he has just seen, and asks, "My God, why did you stay for all of that?" To which he quietly replies, "He said at the beginning of the semester that we weren't allowed to leave during the movie section. I feel like that kid went above and beyond that day." Story 18. Student, not teacher, yada yada. I was in a costuming course in college, and instead of learning actual sewing, we were given a piece of paper with a word on it. Each word was a garment from a different era, and we had to look it up and create an advertisement for it, as if we were advertising it to the people of that time. I was annoyed that I didn't get to actually learn anything, so I decided to take the assignment dead seriously. I had a garment from ancient Rome, and, with the help of my fluent father, wrote the entire thing in Latin. Story 19. Not a teacher. I'm a student taking a health class, and the unit is mental disorders. We just spent a couple days on eating disorders, and we're working on a packet. One of the questions is anorexia more alike or different than bulimia? Explain. I started writing about how they are more similar. One student asked the teacher about the question, which leads to the teacher explaining Joe to answer the question. I was in the middle of answering the question myself when I heard the teacher say that the answer is that they are more different. Not being able to help myself, I started to argue with the teacher. First on the basis that the two are more different, but then I argued that there can't be a wrong answer if you're able to thoroughly explain your answer due to the wording of the question. The teacher refused to change her mind. Now note that this wasn't an obnoxious argument. This was more of a civil discussion. The entire class, about 30 kids, all agreed with me, but the teacher continued to refuse to even consider that we could be right. So I got mad and devised a plan. I wrote a 6-page research paper about how anorexia and bulimia are similar, properly citing sources, and everything MLA style. It had a bibliography page and everything. I then submitted the paper as my answer for the question, which only required about a sentence to answer it. The teacher still refused to give me credit for my answer. I went to administration, I told them the story, and gave them my paper and everything. I was expecting them to tell me to stop wasting their time, but the principal actually decided to hear me out. After reading my paper and reviewing the entire question, he determined that I deserved full credit for the question. So then the teacher gave me credit and an apology for his behavior. I also apologized for making a whole debacle out of everything, but I wanted him to know that just because we're students, we aren't immediately wrong. So for about 6 hours of work, I got the full 2 points for the question. Overkill, yes, worth it, I think so. Story 20. During student teaching last semester, one of the assignments my co-student teacher created was for a short story, basically just 5 paragraphs composing exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and conclusion. One of my students turned in 9 pages of an epic. As a writer, I was thoroughly impressed. As a teacher, I was dreading sifting through 9 pages like I was raw school. Story 21. This is about me as a student. In middle school health, there was an assignment to give a speech on the dangers of an illegal drug. This was back in the days of I was assigned marijuana. I wrote a fairly lengthy rhyming speech, which was really a poem that I memorized and recited to the class. The teacher liked it so much that it was published in the school newsletter, and I was asked to recite it at the next assembly in front of the entire school. I didn't even get a perfect score on the speech. The scale was out of 6, and I got 3 SIXS and a 5, although I can't remember what for. But I was pretty annoyed at the time, probably because I'm a terribly nervous public speaker. I was a pretty gratuitous show-off in my younger years. Also, I smoke weed pretty regularly now. Story 22, I assigned a culture project for AP Human Geography. I assigned 14 world regions and asked for 3 languages spoken, dominant religions, migration patterns, etc. There was some more, however, a student included in her 40-page binder, not what I was expecting, the following among other things: money from each country in the region, packaged food from each region, and she took apart 40 musical greeting cards so that when you turned the pages it played music that would correspond with the theme of the page. Most kids just bullet pointed it. After that year, I used her project to tell my new students that was the minimum for AC. Story 23 once again, not a teacher, but in 4th grade we had a book report type assignment, and we had to make a visual aid. Most people made pictures or models made from sticks and craft supplies, but my best friend, at the time, made a full-on working fountain. I'm pretty sure his dad was in the mafia, and my friend did absolutely none of the project, though. Story 24, not a teacher, but back in high school, we had an assignment where we had to make a commercial for our econ class. Everyone just had videos of themselves promoting a product, but one of my friends went the extra mile and created this. I think the teacher who teaches that econ class still uses it as an example to this day. The creator of the video also happens to be here on Reddit. You'll find him in the comments below. He's Yuswan Chera. Story 25, I teach history, and I was teaching about the history of boats and famous boats. The assignment was to make a model of any type of boat: warboat, cruise ship, exploring boats, or mythology boats. I gave examples of blueprints for warboats, drawings of cruise ships, etc. It was an easy project. I come into work and find a 1-inch scale model of Noah's Ark and a 30-page essay paper debunking the flood, every animal fitting in the ark, Noah food supplies, and the science behind a 30-day flood. The student told me he likes working with and learning about new things. He knows I am a historian who loves studying about religion and thought I would enjoy it. He proceeds to hand me a second essay about why most major religions have a great flood of some sort. The student is in college for history and science thanks to me. Story 26, being the student, I had one of those moments. 9th grade English teacher assigned a minimum 2-page free write story. I wrote a 14-page story about Will Smith saving the world from zombies using Pokemon that would hug them. Story 27, I was the student in these scenarios, but both times I genuinely just misunderstood. The first was pretty straightforward and common. I wrote an essay instead of a paragraph. Ended up paying off, though, because that teacher loved me after that. The second scenario was in science class. We were given an assignment to do a project on an element. Options for projects included posters, slideshows, and newspaper articles, stuff like that. Another option was a short story, which ended up meaning just a few paragraphs. I didn't know that, however, so I made an entire children's book about gold. I made gold a character, wrote it, illustrated it, everything. It ended up being about 15 pages in total. My teacher actually told me I should send it somewhere to get it published, but I never ended up doing it, and I have no idea where the book is now, which is a shame because I spent a ridiculous amount of time on it. Story 28, my high school roommate was a math genius, literally first in international tournament genius. One semester, the principal himself, a math professor, wanted to work with my roommate for some research stuff and gave him his PhD thesis as some introductory reading. My roommate not only read and understood the 100-page paper, but also highlighted several errors in it. Story 29. Well, I was an obnoxious high school student, so I will jump in here, I guess. I think my worst offense, other than 40-page math reports and actually reading the books for book reports, was the time I made a website. Ancient history assignment was a multimodal presentation, as in having a video or something to go along with voice recordings presentation. The general thing for this type of assignment was to make a shitty video with a bunch of pictures and drop in voice recordings of your essay presentation. I was bored of doing this and decided to make a website in Adobe Flash. The regret is real. Several pages, pictures, included voice recordings, etc. Later, I had something that looked straight out of the 90s and took way too much effort, but it worked. I got an A, but the 8 hours work probably could have been better spent on something else. Story 30, I wasn't he teacher, I was the student. I was failing math badly in year 9, and my parents were obviously quite worried, so instead of doing the normal thing and try to improve my grades, I decided that for me, next assignment in any class, I was going to get an A. It just happens that day we were given an essay to write in history about the First World War, so for the next 2 nights, I stayed up all night doing research and writing this essay that had a maximum word count of 700. This was my first time doing an essay with a maximum word count. So I decided to make it 1918 words long. 1918 World War I, get it. Ended up getting an A and took it as a sign to improve my maths. I'm still doing horribly, but at least I'm trying. Story 31, Ionat. Our teacher had us present a chapter from the European history textbook as a group assignment. My friends and I wrote and performed a 5-song rock opera about Peter the Great, many as were had. Story 32 yet again, not a teacher, but also not the student in question. In 6th grade, we had this project where we had to make some sort of display with all the landforms: mountain, canyon, plateau, peninsula, island, etc. The day it's due, this one kid brings in a giant covered tray. When it came time to present, turns out this kid had taken blocks of solid chocolate and carved out each landform and put them all in one landscape similar to this illustration. Kid got all the yas, and we got to eat chocolate. For mine, I just made a poster and was done with it. Story 33, not a teacher, but this happened to me in university. One of our class final exams was scheduled at 4 p.m. open book exam. We started the exam, and by the time at 8:00 exam time was only 3 hours, the graduate assistant got fed up and asked how many people are done with 75 of exam. Not a single show of hand. Then he asked how many are done with 50, and again, not a single show of hand. Finally, when he asked about 30, about 70 of the class raised hands. He then called professor and asked us to take our exams home and then submit it directly to the professor by noon next day at his office. I stayed up whole night working on that exam and finished by 6 a.m., slept for 5 hours, and then handed it in to the professor. Open book exams, they're the worst. Actually, a teacher gave my 8th graders a presentation assignment on a genetic disorder of their choice. I didn't want to stress them out. Mostly wanted to get them familiar with genetic mutations, how different mutations cause different problems. I'm thinking like 5-minute presentations tops. This kid comes in, brings his cousin who has the super rare, literally like 10 people in the world have this disorder he's chosen, gives a 20-minute, beautifully explained, in detail presentation that includes everything from the actual karyotype of his cousin's chromosomes to the details of how exactly his specific medication works. That kid got extra points. I hope he becomes a geneticist. Story 34, sorry, not a teacher. My sister had to write an essay. The subject was very open, and after a week, she went to teacher anxiously and told her that she had written 37 pages and isn't even near finishing. So could she have a week or so extra time so she could cover even most of the subject? The teacher told her that she expected 3 pages. Story 35, I'm not a teacher, but I can imagine she was puzzled by this. In 3rd grade, we were tasked with writing a 5-paragraph book report over the weekend. My dad made me write a full book report that ended up being around 5 pages. He sat there the entire time I wrote it on the typewriter. This was in 1990 or so. I still remember the teacher's face being, WTF is this? I asked for 5 paragraphs. Story 36, obligatory, not a teacher. Disclaimer. When I was a teenager, we were reading Greek epics, the Odyssey, the Iliad, etc. We had some assignment that involved identifying key features of the Greek epic. It was a week-long project-style assignment with a lot of room for creativity. My buddy and I wrote a Greek epic. It was novel length, about 60,000 words, written in the style of the Odyssey. We printed it and bound it ourselves in leather. This was like the dominating thing we did for the whole week, just writing this book, and I stayed awake all night binding it. The saddest part was that the whole thing started as joke. The book was called The Testiclid, and it followed the adventures of the hero Testicles. At one point, he goes to the island of Lesbos to enlist the help of the lesbian army. We were teenage boys, and therefore thought we were being insanely clever instead of just cringy. The teacher noped the whole project and asked us to please turn in a 1- or 2-page summary of our book because she didn't want to read it. I do not blame her. Story 37, not the teacher, but the student. We were asked to write a short scene for theater class. There was a 1-page minimum, and most of the class only did 1. 5-page max. My friend managed 3 pages. I wrote 10 front and back. Theater teacher absolutely loved it, but did point this out and praise me in front of the class for going above and beyond what was asked. TLDR, did 20 times the work teacher asked once. Story 38, history prof here. I assigned a new biography of Jesse H. Jones a few semesters ago. Big shot Texas banker, FDR appointee, fellow Houstonian. Only written assignment associated with the material was a 2- to 3-page mini research paper on any related topic from the book. Easy, right? Turned out one of Jones' great-nephews was in my class that semester. I had no idea until the kid brought in a 12-page paper along with a ton of valuable family mementos and correspondence to show the class. We wound up doing 2 weeks on the topic. Even the students who hadn't originally read the book got excited and caught up. Story 39, student here. Got to continue that classic AskReddit stereotype. When I was in 6th grade, we had to write a paper about a constellation. It was supposed to be 3/4 of a page long, but it was written as 34, and I read it as 3 to 4 pages. I ended up writing 4 pages about Pegasus and almost got a bad score for not following directions. Story 40, a little off topic, but my pet peeve is when a teacher says I want an essay that's exactly 1,000 words long or something. They'll make sure to keep it short enough. But inevitably, there's someone in the class who goes way overboard and does double or triple the amount they were told to. Then this person manages to get the best mark in the class, even though they didn't follow instructions. I've even had teachers say that they'll deduct marks if you're off the exact word count, but still give the best mark to the longest essay. I'm seeing examples of that all over this thread, and it's killing me. Just because something is longer does not mean it takes more effort. Condensing your thoughts takes a lot of effort too.